Kideaters vs. Zoo BoyZ, Chapter 5. Getting out of jail, sail or fail. One day all 4 boys were pulled from the block, all at the same time. That had never happened before. They were led into a room with a big table, chairs that weren't fastened to the floor, and a few other items that weren't secured like the items found in all the other classrooms, dining area, and recreation hall. The boys had never been in a boardroom before. They thought they were being taken back to court or something, but they soon found out that they were assigned there to meet with their parents, lawyers, and head warden. The discussion was led by the warden. Even without any words being said, it was somehow made clear that no one else's opinion or voice was to be considered in this meeting. No one else mattered. The parents wanted to tell the boys how nice it was to not only see them, but to see them without a thick 3-inch glass between them. This was the first time the boys had ever seen the warden. He was in charge of everything, the top dog in this dogfight. However, he was easily manipulated by others who wield powers beyond the walls of his junior jail. The proposal being made was more of a mandate than an option. He spoke louder than necessary and rocked up and down on the balls of his feet as a sure sign of trying to be in control and somehow above everyone else in the room. He jingled loose change in his pocket as if wanting to show them that he had money. His southern drawl was long, his words spread out, and they were colored with a self-proclaming authority and potent southern stench as he thrusted emphasis not only on some words, but even on some syllables. He barked out, "Boys, parents, and lawyers, we'd gather here today to discuss the termination or the clarification of these here boys." They all listened as he turned 3 syllables into 4 syllables. His accent had the tendency to do that, forcing words that were normally spoken quickly and shortened into almost a sing-song wave. At times his speech fooled listeners, as sometimes even a single syllable word was forced into 3 different syllables. They hung on as his pronunciation took individual words and slid them into other words that were just standing there in their own little world, then flung and slurred into sentences and phrases of their own. All too often, people who heard him speak developed the misconception that this language, southern inflection and flair, was an indication or reflection of his education. However, it was just an accent developed from living in the deep South around others who spoke similar in nature. You don't just become a warden overnight without several full years of college. Much of his life he spent archiving a few degrees in criminal justice studies. The boys were just glad to be out of their individual cells, away from the whole cell block. They didn't really care why. Their minds were just starting to chase after answers as to why they were summoned to such an official-looking meeting. The children's stomachs began to churn at the fear of what they might have done wrong, placing them into an even more intense detention. Ronnie had the sudden urge to use the bathroom, but felt too restricted to dare ask. John's belly made a dwerp sound that he hoped no one else heard. Jeremy felt a little lightheaded, and Dave's body began to sweat. They were never appointed to meet with their parents, lawyers, and warden all at the same time. In the corner, almost blending into the wall and yet clearly present, was an armed guard and in each upper corner of the room were tiny mounted cameras. The tension in the air was growing thicker as the warden took his sweet, deep southern time reaching his point. The parents' hands began to sweat, and the lawyers' neckties seemed to be tightening. They felt the starch of their collar shirts eating away at their skin. Their high-priced ties were now literally just a loose noose, tightening as each second thickened. All those conditions only seemed to make the warden's speech extend longer than need be. He rolled on. Now, in lieu of these 4 boys serving their 4 years, Mr. Johan Hansen has, yes, proposed a solution. Yes? Proposed? Solution? What? Their minds were working overtime as they tried to quickly translate what was said, while even more was being said. Jeremy's mom raised her hand. She was a bit timid, but needed to ask for clarification. The warden was about to demand, "Save all questions for the end," but he surrendered long enough to acknowledge her. "Yes, miss, you have a question?" She spoke softly and tenderly as she almost cried out, yes, I am Jeremy's mother. Sorry. Am I to understand that you said in lieu of these 4 boys serving their 4 years, Mr. John Hansen has proposed a solution? Is that what you said? Am I understanding correctly? Sorry. She tried to come across as if she fully understood, while at the same time not wanting to offend him. Excuse me. The warden took a deep breath. It was obvious she was trying his patience. He looked back at the highly decorated guard, then replied, "I thought I made it clear, but I'll say it again. In lieu of these 4 boys serving their 4 years," he sucked in more air in order to finish, "Mr. Johan Hansen, he has proposed a solution." His words increased in volume. Young John Minor's mind associated listening to this hillbilly accent as comparable to ancient Japanese water torture, where you're strapped to a table, yelled at in a foreign language, as drops of water were tediously dripped on his forehead for days on end. Ron wondered how he'd phonetically spell the words he heard being spoken. He thought, I've heard Southern accents, but this is like a whole other dialect. Ronnie hid the smirk on his face. Just then, when they thought the sermon was over, they were able to climb over the language barrier the best they could. They realized the painstaking speech was actually delivering a message of deliverance for the 4 delinquents. They also realized, as intended, that what was being offered was more of an order, not an option. They were being told what would happen next. It wasn't just a get-out-of-jail-free card, giving the boys a way to break out and go home. It was more of a, you'll do this because you have to, and the reward or payment will be you get to live. Jail if you fail. The freedom from the 4-year sentence sounded great, but going back to Zoo Island, specifically to catch and contain the monsters there, that would be risky and life-costing than a full-blown prison, more life-costing than a full-blown prison riot. They heard the emphasis on the words if, but, however, only. Those words all depended on whether or not the kids could escape the Kideaters they had already seen on that island. The warden's southern accent was bad enough, but he then introduced his head guard, Mr. Slater, asking him to tell the boys about how they would have a chaperone or guardian, and to explain some details on how they would be making their exit from here in order to enter the zoo. Just before handing the meeting over to his right-hand man, the warden said, "We's got a lot of work to do, boys. You got to be trained and taught a whole few things so you come out of this with success. Now, I'm giving y'all over to Mr. Slater, my tap guide. Mr. Slater, take it away." What the warden was saying filtered through as, "We got a lot of work to do, boys. You got to be trained and taught a few things so you come out of this with success. Now, I'm giving y'all over to Mr. Slater, my top guard. Mr. Slater, take it away." Mr. Slater was referred to as Mr. Slade Her by all the kids, as if he slayed or killed a woman. Rumor had it that he killed his own mother, and instead of being punished in jail, they made him the top disciplinarian. The kids fully believed that he got his jollies when he inflicted pain on others. His accent was also by far one of the strongest accents they had ever heard. He grew up as far northeast of the South as possible. It was another completely different dialect than anyone in the room. The boys straightened up in their chairs in fear that this head guard would rain wrath down on their heads and love every minute of it. The only time any of the kids saw him was when they were in deep trouble. As the others in the room also sat up, Mr. Slater stood up, front and center, with a huge firearm strapped to his back, utility belt tight and secure, extra ammo and tear gas bombs on a sash that paraded diagonally down and across his chest. His words came out loud, authoritative, and with the hard northeastern pronunciation. "Not all our guards are aware of these terms and agreements." Once again, everyone in the room, in their own head, translated, "Not all of our guards are aware of the terms and agreements." His few words were a clear notification for those listening to be prepared to keep translating silently, while their minds' ears strained their minds' eyes, gave the rest of their entire body the directive to become paralyzed with fright and full submission. Although they were all sitting, it was as if they were at attention while still in their chairs. Everything about this man's cold stone presence demanded it. He continued, "You guys will be driven by one of us guides to this warehouse that's not too far from here. Now, make no mistake, take this ain't no fancy affair. You's guys still gonna pay for the crimes you's committed. Make no mistake about that." Full translation, "You guys will be driven by one of us guards to this warehouse that's not too far from here. Make no mistake, this isn't no fancy affair. You guys still have to pay for the crimes you committed. Make no mistake about that." He went on to explain how they would meet their guardian/chaperone at the warehouse, and be briefed further on how they could be trained to heighten their survival rate on the island. Dave hid his smirk this time. He wanted to proclaim how they did it before and how capable they were of doing it again. However, he knew better than to interrupt or even make one peep. He couldn't even clear his throat while Slater carried on. There was a lot more to all this than David knew. But then again, this young man thought he knew it all. The strict disciplinarian continued to speak. Because not all guards are aware, we got to sneak yous out. Full official translation, because not all guards are aware, we gotta sneak you out. The words sneak out raised the boys' interest. Their ears perked up to hear his scheme. Slater gave the details. We gotta pull each of yous at individually so it doesn't look suspicious. We've come up with an excuse as to why yous four are being put at of cell block C. His pause in speech gave them time to take in what was said, translate it, then prepare them for what was coming up next. So far, they were pretty sure he said, we gotta pull each of you out individually so it doesn't look suspicious. We've come up with an excuse as to why you four are being pulled out of cell block C. Slater followed up with, yous don't say anything to anyone. Just do what you's told. We going to claim that you four boss are being transferred to another facility. That's as anybody else's business to know. I repeat, you guys are not to talk about this plan to nobody. He slammed his fists on the table to add an over-authoritative emphasis, then finished with, paperwork is being drawn up now. If the accent behind what he said was removed, the spoken plan for being transferred was translated as such. Mr. Slater, yous don't say anything to anyone. Translation, you, the four boys, don't say anything to anyone. Mr. Slater, just do what you's told. Translation, just do what you're all four are told. Mr. Slater, we going to claim that you four bass. Translation, we're going to claim that you four boys, Mr. Slater, are being transferred to another facility. Translation, are being transferred to another facility. Mr. Slater, that's all anybody else needs to know. Translation, that's all anybody else needs to know. Mr. Slater, I repeat, you guys do not talk about these plans. Translation, I repeat, you guys do not talk about any of these plans. Mr. Slater, to nobody. Translation, to nobody. The fist slam on the board table spoke a universal language, followed up with, Mr. Slater, paperwork is being drawn up now. Translation, paperwork is being drawn up now. He wasn't kidding. There was so much paperwork behind this whole scheme. So much legal mumbo-jumbo. So many things to be signed by everyone, including confidentiality forms, basically stating that if they told anyone anything, they would be breaching the contract and they'd have to pay through the nose. Under the penalty of law, they were guaranteed to not only be slapped with the huge monetary fines, but also be convicted of civil offenses resulting in imprisonment up to 25 years. These penalties made the boys' 4-year sentence look like child's play, just a stroll in the park. Of course, the legal jargon wasn't as translatable as the warden and Mr. Slater's accents. Trying to understand or make sense of this document was like trying to read a foreign language no one had ever heard of before. There were more holes and legal loopholes in these forms than there were in a fishing net. Most of the words strung into sentences, blocked into paragraphs that made about as much sense as a screen door on a submarine. The bottom line was, if you cross us, you're screwed. In short, put into easier layman's terms, the main deal of conditions in this new directive was this: John, Ron, Jeremy, and Dave would be granted an early release from juvie jail under the terms and agreements of their willingness to not just go back to Zoo Island, but while there, their mandatory mission was to capture wild creatures and stay alive while doing it. In addition to that, although it was pretty well masked in the political correct legal muck, the children were being sworn in to capture each and every extreme, exotic, and innovative animal on the planet that other trappers failed to specifically detect. We're talking about hybrid insects, reptiles, mammals, aquatic, and the whole mix thereof. On that island, there were living things that are able to completely conceal their identity. Some with the ability to morph completely into other objects. They had to decode the mutant's disguise. Hansen insisted that the boys help develop a plan that would decipher the exact location of the human imposter, Mr. Ralph Willoughby, a.k.a. Robinson Crusoe, exposing the biggest culprit on the island and notify command of said location in order for the authorities to take him captive. Hansen asked specifically for these boys to help, not only because they were aware of some of those animals, of how some of those animals act and react, hide and camouflage, but also they saw where Robinson's hideout was. Eventually, the boys, parents, lawyers, and jail staff reached the true bottom line of this lengthy agreement. Everyone on board with all the ins and outs. The next hurdles involved actually getting the boys out of the jail and into Zoo Island without anyone else knowing about it. End of chapter 5, on to chapter 6.